Today on Locked On Red Wings, the third line has just not been producing. What can they do to shake up the makeup of that third line? And also, Elmer Soderblom had a really good first game, but what should his role be going forward?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's a host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News, while I am a color commentator for Oakland University, ACHA D1 men's hockey. Scotty, happy Thursday for the people. We got a game day tonight playing the Montreal Canadiens. Are you excited for that big rivalry game?
You know, I do enjoy, as kind of illegal as it sounds to say, like I do enjoy watching the Habs play. They're just like a fun young team, and I'm sure once they're like really good and winning a lot of games, then I will not like them anymore. But for now, it's in that like ignorance is bliss phase where it's like, oh yeah, like they're just a fun hockey team and they're young and we'll see what happens. So yeah, obviously big game for the Wings though. We'll talk about that later.
They better chill the F out. It's not their turn yet. It's not their
turn. Yeah,
they
do need to chill. I agree. We're kind of taking steps forward before I was planning on it for sure.
They're currently the second wild card, Scotty, holding tied for the first wild card with Ottawa Senators at 52. Man. So we'll talk about the Canadiens here in segment 3, as well as preview the entire 3-game homestand as well. But first, I want to talk about that third line on today's episode because it has been kind of stinky. So we'll talk about that on today's episode. But first, got to let you guys know today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Scotty, the third line, the current iteration of the third line, JT Compher, Jonathan Berggren, and Vladimir Tarasenko are not producing points right now. In the last stretch of games, in the last 10 games, Tarasenko has 5 points. All 5 of those points came in a 3-game stretch in which Tarasenko scored 2 goals and had 3 assists. JT Compher in the last 10 games, Scotty, has had 1 goal. That's it. That is his only point in the last 10 games. And Jonathan Berggren has 3 points in the last 10 games. Obviously, we know he had the power play goal as well as the game winner against the Columbus Blue Jackets, tacked on an assist in there for 3 points. That is not a... That's not a powerful production makeup from a third line. And I understand, right? Most of your production is going to come from your top 6, but we've talked about it time and time again. You know, their top 6, while it is dependable and it's going to get you a goal or 2 every night, right? Larkin and Raymond assisted on Sherratt's goal against the Philadelphia Flyers. If this team's going to have any modicum of success outside of the power play, they need their depth scoring to turn it on. And ever since Marco Kasper got promoted to that top line and JT Compher became the center of that third line, there has been absolutely no production for the third line. So the question is what can the Red Wings do about the third line? What kind of shakeups can we see in the makeup of the bottom 6 to maybe give that third line a jolt and get a little bit of depth production?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I guess that is kind of the million-dollar question when you talk about depth scoring. This really changes significantly. This whole conversation we're going to have and are having changes a ton if Tarasenko is even close to what was expected of him going into the year, right? Like if he is producing at an even average to slightly above average clip in terms of goal scoring or his point production period, we're talking about this in a much different light. Because it's like, okay, you know, the even if he is middle 6 or like the beginning of the year, you planned on him being your second line guy even, right? Like even if that ended up being the case and he was playing so well that he worked up there, then you're knocking someone down and you're still inherently helping. So like that is a huge X factor. Vlad is a huge X factor for this team, and I think his production really is going to determine a lot of what the depth scoring looks like. Not to put it all on one dude's shoulders. Obviously, everybody else has to has to perform as well. But I think so much of it kind of relies on him in terms of what we're getting out of the bottom six. And if you go under the assumption, we'll say that he's not going to have a huge uptick in production, and this is just kind of what he's going to be from here on out, then that's that's where all the questions lie, and that's where a lot of the shakeup happens. I think there's a really fun, I think is the word, conversation to have about Elmer and his role going forward. I think he could presumably help in one of those roles, but like Joe Veleno was healthy the other day. Like it really doesn't look great in terms of what they have to offer, depth scoring in that bottom six.
Right. And we've had the Tarasenko conversation in the past. I mean, he is a guy that, as you noted, is not producing anywhere near the level that we need him to do on the goal scoring side of things. And had a decent year last year. Like, this is a guy who's just came off a season where he scored 20, 25 goals last year. Yet this season, the production has completely fallen off. And notably, I think the most notable part is, besides just the lack of speed, but how easily he's knocked off the puck along the boards is alarming to me. But, like, he's not the only culprit here. JT Compher has been a ghost this season.
I mean, yeah, you go down the center, right? Like we talked about it yesterday. You go down the line up the middle and outside of Larkin, it's really anybody who's played center hasn't done much. I mean, obviously you mentioned Compher there. He's done next to nothing in terms of offensive production this year. Andrew Kopp hasn't produced really much at all, which we were kind of expecting going into the year. We already talked about Veleno. He's hasn't done much, especially in the last month or so. And then like Marco Kasper is a rookie that we have high hopes for, and just recently kind of started his uptick in production and wasn't before that. So like pretty much everyone they have put up the middle outside of Dylan Larkin has been producing next to nothing offensively, which goes without saying, but this is going to shock you, is a massive issue.
Right, and this current iteration of the third line, as it stands, has an expected goals percentage of 39.8%.
Yeah.
Their expected goals for is 3.7, and their expected goals against is 5.6. Ironically, according to Money Puck, they have not given up a single goal against as a line, despite having 5.6 expected goals against, which would be the third worst amongst any line that they've tried out with the Detroit Red Wings so far this season. So clearly this line is not working, and just talking about how bad the line is not going to solve any issues. The question is, and you kind of hit the nail on the head, like the center depth is a huge problem. We don't really have any centers. Like, okay, you swap JT Compher and Andrew Kopp. Well, we've done that. We've seen JT Compher with Kane and DeBrincat, and it was bad. And JT Compher's had a bad year overall. He's on pace for 36 points, 12 points fewer than he had last season, and he's also getting hammered in the faceoff circle. He's only won like 44% of his faceoffs this year, which is not enough. So I'm at a point now where you almost have to take JT Compher off of center until he gets it right. But then who's your solution? Now, Marco Kasper, when he was on Vladimir Tarasenko and Jonathan Berggren's line, I'm not going to, revision his history. They didn't produce a lot of points. That is true. But we did talk about how game in and game out, they were a solid line. They looked good. They looked like they were always on the cusp of scoring, and the data backs that up. Their expected goals for percentage for that line was 50% on the... Actually, I'm sorry, it was even better. It was 50.5% expected goal share. They were producing more offense than they were giving up just by a shred, whereas the Compher at center is getting crushed. So your best effort or your best idea of replacing Compher at center is Marco Kasper, but then again, now what do you do about your top line? Who's back on your wing on the top line? I don't think Vladimir Tarasenko's done enough to deserve being up there. Do you put JT Compher up there? He can play wing. I mean, you have a ton of winger options, but it really just comes back down to that center depth as a whole is just terrible.
Yeah, well, and I mean, we'll have that conversation a lot more over the summer, I'm sure, but that's something that we knew may have been a problem going into the year, but I don't think any of us expected it to be as poor as it is. I mean, it is legitimately nothing in terms of offensive production and point production up the middle outside of Larks. It's Yeah, not great.
And Joe Veleno struggled. Michael Rasmussen looked good in one game last night, 2 nights ago, with the fourth line. Christian Fischer's played at center. Like, this is you're getting to a point now where you're going to have to quite literally break out the blender to try and get some production out of your bottom six. Jonathan Berggren might be is he the only one in the bottom six who's really scored recently? Obviously Vladimir Tarasenko had that 2-goal game against San Jose, but Berggren, it's mostly been on breakaways, right? Or on the power play. There's been no production from the bottom six, and it's getting incredibly frustrating to watch, especially that third line again. It's just, you don't expect much out of your fourth line, but you need your third line to at least produce a little bit, and they haven't. And Elmer Soderblom, who we're going to talk about soon, had a really good fourth line game, so maybe give him a look. I don't know. You're going to have to really hit the blender, and honest to God, I'm willing to bump Vladimir Tarasenko down to the fourth line because he just does not look like he's jiving at all right now in any middle six role.
Agreed.
All right. Scotty, we're going to head to segment 2, and when we return, we'll talk about Elmer Soderblom and a little bit more about his role on this hockey team, so stay tuned to Locked On Red Wings. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's right, $300 to keep the action going. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get that $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, one of the solutions we could have on the third line is Elmer Soderblom. And is it a knee-jerk reaction to say that? Absolutely. He played one game and, he had something to prove, so he might have been playing a little amped up, but he had a really good game. And I think this also speaks to the fact that we're kind of out of ideas, right? We've seen Michael Rasmussen. We've seen Christian Fischer. We've seen Joe Veleno. Tyler Mott when he's healthy. We've seen that. We've seen every possible iteration of the bottom six, and none of it, unfortunately, is really producing any consistent offense. So the main solution right now to shake up the third line is, put Soderblom on the wing and see what happens. Because if he's going to stick with this team, what is his role going to be? Is it just bottom six? What can we get and what can we expect out of Soderblom?
Well, I do think that you are likely looking at a bottom six player, but if he can solidify himself there and be solid, then that's fine. Like that's not a negative thing if he's producing down there. I think in a perfect world, he is a guy that you are able to just say, you know what, whoever you're out there with, go wreak havoc in front of the net and have, decent hands, be a decent passer. Kind of like what Rasmussen was a little bit. He ventured out to the wings a little bit more than I guess I'm explaining right now. But I think that not just to have him be like just a body, right? Like he's improved his skating. There's reasons to like him on the defensive side of the puck too. But I think that in a perfect world, if you can get kind of that, bleep stir in front of the net a little bit with a guy that's 6'8", like you'll take that. And even play, I don't know, like makeshift bumper a little bit, even though it's 5-on-5. Like, I think that's, I don't know. I think that's kind of where my head is at and what kind of role we could want to see out of him. Now, whether that's plausible or obtainable, I mean, that's the question. Only time will really tell that. I think in terms of third line going forward, I mean, I'm with you. Like, what else? I'm kind of just down to keep trying stuff and see what works and what doesn't. Because right now, everything they've thrown out there this year has really not been great. So I have no issue with it. It's certainly very far from a guarantee that that'll work, but I'm kind of just down to try anything at this point.
I wouldn't mind either Soderblom as a net front presence on the power play too, because of his big body and his soft hands. He could kind of be the perfect complementary piece on a power play to where he can be a scream, but also have the soft touch that some of his teammates lack, one of which we talked about yesterday, to bury that puck when it's down low.
Right. It's exactly what, Rasmussen was for at one point, not very super consistently these days, but like, he's done that. Oscar Sundqvist did that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Sonny was the king of that. They just threw him out there and said, go, throw elbows in front of the net and mess stuff up with your 6'6" frame or whatever he was. And I think that if he can replicate that at the NHL level, every team would take that out of a guy, again, that's a 6'8" forward.
100%. But I mean, even if you put Soderblom up on that third line and he's able to continue to bring the presence that he did, as well as be a guy who can get to the net, which is something this team very, very much lacks, that problem is still not, the center problem is still not solved. And when we're reviewing our options, right? Our options are 1, Marco Kasper, 2, Joe Veleno. I mean, you could, I guess, maybe Andrew Kopp. He's already playing center on the second line, but then again, you swap him on JT Compher on the third line. You got Michael Rasmussen and Christian Fischer, or the wild card of Nate Danielson. But I don't think you're at a point yet this season where you're willing to bring him up, especially because then at that point you're calling somebody up. You need to create a roster spot. So, I honestly think the best scenario for making that third line better at the center position is to then, and I wouldn't consider it a demotion for Marco Kasper. You'd be giving him a center role back, and it would honestly make that third line so much better. But then who do you put on the top line, Scotty? Who do you put on the top line? Like, Vladimir Tarasenko doesn't deserve the promotion with how he's been playing. Joe Veleno was up there. I mean, what a week, 2 weeks it's been for Joe Veleno, right? You brought it up yesterday. To go from top line to healthy scratch. Elmer Soderblom, there we go. We figured it out. Elmer Soderblom, top line winger. I don't know, man. This team is this is a problem that is deeper than just one line. It's showing its ugly head with the one line, but with Marco Kasper filling on the top line winger, because you still lack one more top six winger. We thought that was solved with Vladimir Tarasenko, but evidently not. You take away one of your effective centers, which makes your thin center depth even worse. It's just this team, McClellan, Lalonde, whatever it is, lacks depth. We have a solid top line. We have a solid second line, a decent second line. You have a good top pair when Edvinsson and Seider are together, or a decent top two pairs if they're separated, but just nothing about this team screams depth. It's just like you're relying on your best players to do all of the scoring because you can't rely on the bottom. And it's just getting so frustrating to watch because this is something that Yzerman has tried to address, and he's just swung and he's whiffed on. It's a huge criticism of his tenure is the pro scouting and the free agent signings. You whiffed on Kopp. After a solid first year from JT Compher, he's having a brutal second year. Vladimir Tarasenko has been nowhere near the player he was last year. Just Justin Hall, Ben Sherratt. I mean, you can go down the list of free agent signings that Yzerman has made to try and fill out the depth of his team, and they're just all underperforming except for your goaltenders. And Patrick Kane. But
yeah, and even that's been a 50-50 split, right? Like he was, but has obviously turned that around a lot. So yeah, I agree.
Right. I mean, DeBrincat was a trade. He's been good, but like the free agent acquisitions are just going to haunt this team. Going to haunt this team because a lot of these guys are here for a couple more years. I don't know. I honest to God, if Yzerman's serious about making this team a competitor, I see a trade in the future to shake up this roster. And it's an open secret that he's looking, right? There was the conversation about Dylan Cousins just last month with the Buffalo Sabres. So because on this roster right now, I don't see any solutions that we haven't already tried to fix the lack of production from the bottom six. And that's really devastating.
Completely agree.
All right. We're going to head to segment 3. When we return, we'll preview the game against the Montreal Canadiens as well as take a look at the other two games in this 3-game homestand. So stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, concerts, comedy, theater, or so many more different types of events you can attend to. For me personally, I'm looking forward to going to the Stadium Series game on March 1st. I've already pre-ordered my Stadium Series Lucas Raymond jersey because I just love those uniforms. And I'm excited to attend the game, and I wouldn't have been able to get my tickets without Game Time. Every single one of those features I always talk about in those reads, I used to acquire those tickets. The Game Time picks actually physically showed me on the seating chart where the best value seats were for where they were located, and I got something that they considered being the top 1% of value for the location. Seats around me were going for almost double the amount that I paid. Meanwhile, I used the all-in pricing toggle. I got to see what I was going to pay for each seat with the fees included, so I didn't get surprised at checkout. And I used that promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and I got my $20 off my first purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, big game against the Montreal Canadiens here on Thursday. This is massive because, as I stated at the start of the episode, the Montreal Canadiens are holding on to the second wild card spot right now with 52 points. The Red Wings are at 47 points, 6 points back, and that's so frustrating, right? You go on a 7-game heater, but all the teams around you also go on. Senators, Canadiens, and the Blue Jackets all went on heaters at the same time as you or just shortly after your heater. So after losing 3 of 4, you're back to where you started before McClellan took over. You started with 8 points back, and now you're sitting 6 points back. All that ground you made, gone. So this game against Canadiens is super important, as a regulation win will bring you within 3 points. And the Montreal Canadiens, Scotty, won the first, 2 games of this season series. So what can you tell us about the Montreal Canadiens? What do we got to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, well, as we mentioned at the top of the show, it's a young up-and-coming team that has taken what appears to be a pretty sizable step forward this year. We'll see how sustainable it is and you know what they look like in the second half of the year. This is a team that is kind of taking a path that we have seen a lot of young up-and-coming teams that exit rebuilds take, which is like you bottom out, then you struggle, but you have your core pieces. Then you hit this weird point that, again, like a lot of teams kind of pulling themselves out of the gutter hit, which is you have your core pieces in place on offense and you're pretty good at scoring, but there's no depth on the back line and you don't know who the netminder of the future is necessarily, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of where Montreal is. They are a top half of the NHL offense. They've been really good just at goals a game and putting the puck in the back of the net, just outside the top 10 in the NHL there, but are a bottom 5 team in a lot of defensive metrics and goals allowed and et cetera. So, but oddly enough, then the special teams are flipped. They're 19th in the power play and 9th in the penalty kill because hockey. But as a whole, this is a team that has, when they are able to win games, has done so on the heels of good offense. 7-2-1 in their last 10 and are already 2-0 against you this year. So let's maybe win a game.
Yeah, let's maybe win a game against a divisional opponent you're struggling to battle for a wild card spot with. Be on the lookout for Cole Caulfield. He has 24 goals in 47 games, 44 points on the season. He's pacing at a half a goal a game, which is pretty incredible pace. 40-goal pace for Cole Caulfield this season. And, of course, don't sleep on Patrick Laine. He's been on a tear since he came back from his first injury. 12 goals in 19 games with the Montreal Canadiens. That's part of the reason why their power play is surging up the rankings right now, because he just keeps scoring goals. And, of course, Nick Suzuki leads the team in points. He's a point per game at 47. Lane Hutson has 36 assists in 47 games, which is crazy. He is a high offense threat for the Canadiens. So, I mean, they got a really young team, and like you said, maybe outperforming their standing right now, kind of like we saw with the Red Wings, the Buffalo Sabres, and the Ottawa Senators in years past. But regardless of whether or not they're outperforming, right now they are a hot team, and they're playing really good hockey. So beating them is going to be massive. And we've already seen them twice, so there's not like a ton of new things to break down about their game besides just go out there on home ice and beat them in regulation, please. Stop giving an extra point to team. You beat Ottawa in overtime, and you lost to Philadelphia in overtime. Let's start winning these in regulation. Like that. Let's not do the song and dance. Come on.
I agree. And like you said, this kind of kicks off a really important homestand for the Wings. Obviously they're just now coming home from a 4-game road trip. So to come back home against a team that going into the year, I think most people would have said the Wings were, I don't know about comfortably, but like pretty comfortably better than the Habs. And now we're here. They have a better record than the Wings, obviously. We already talked a couple of times about their good start to the season. Then you play Tampa at home on Saturday. Okay. We all know what the Lightning are at this point. Then you play the Kings at home on Monday, who have been off to a fantastic start. I say start. We're in, the end of January.
Over halfway through.
Have been great so far this year. And that's your home stretch. So, this may be the easiest, quote unquote, game you play, the easiest opponent you have on this home stretch. So, yeah, you should probably take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that emphasizes winning this hockey game, right? Because you just went to Tampa, got your butts kicked. You went to LA back in November, got your butt kicked. And those are, as you just put, better teams than the Montreal Canadiens. So the first game against Montreal, is a must-win in my eyes, just because of playoff race, but also it's as you said, the easiest of the three. My expectation, I won't even say my expectation, my need is that this team wins 2 of 3 at home. I'm demanding 2 of 3 wins because you didn't get the 4 points. You got 3 points on the road trip. 1 point shy of that bar that I set, and you need to make up some of that at home now if you want to stay in the race. My preferred route to 2 wins would be Tampa and LA, or Tampa and Montreal, rather, because those are 2 teams in your division, rather than the cross-conference game. Those games in your division basically become a 4-point swing, although you're not catching Tampa. I understand that, but still. But 4 points in any fashion in this 6.3 game homestand is what this team needs. So again, like we talked about it, Todd McLellan wasn't going to really get to see and do work with the hockey team until the 7-game winning streak ended. And now it's ended, and they've lost 4 of 5, going 1-2-1 in that stretch. So it is time to see actual progress. And we've seen progress in some categories, right? The possession metrics, Corsi 4, expected goals for percentage, all trending in a good direction. Power play outside of the 2 games back-to-back on the road has been superb. But the offensive creativity is starting to stagnate, and they're giving up too many opportunities in high-danger areas. So we need to see that addressed. We need to see less high-danger opportunities on our end and more in their end. Just shooting the puck from the perimeter is not enough. So I'm gonna be looking really hard to see if this team can actually make progress doing the work that they need to do.
Absolutely. I agree.
Well, Scotty, with that being said, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow to recap this game against the Montreal Canadiens, so stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.